I mean, the minute I saw it, I said, oh my God. I mean, the second I saw it, I just said, oh, wow, this is a story that, my God Almighty, I haven't seen the likes of this in my lifetime. I'm not defending it for a second because it is completely indefensible. I mean, 100%. But like, there was 2 TDs there at the same time. There were, and people will forget that side of it. There was 2 TDs out of 160 TDs in Dáil were at that event. So it wasn't like they were all there to, which is kind of the narrative that can emerge potentially. And we just want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Hello and welcome to the Southern Star's Coronavirus podcast. I'm the news editor, Siobhan Cronin, and this week our featured interview is with former Fine Gael TD Jim Daly. A former school teacher, publican and politician, Mr Daly has recently taken up a new role as an advocate for the home care sector. He talks to us about life after politics shortly. In our musical segment this week, we will have our digital manager Jack McCarron's choice from our archive of Southern Star sessions, all recorded live in recent years at our Southern Star studio in Skibbereen. He has chosen music from folk singer John Blek. But first, this week's interview. Jim Daly has been a school teacher, a principal, a publican, a politician, and now he has a new role with the board of HCCI, that's Home and Community Care Ireland, the national body representing the 80 companies that employ 10,000 carers, providing home care to 20,000 older and vulnerable people throughout Ireland. During the pandemic, he also volunteered at his local hospital in Clonakilty, and he spoke to me about this and more a little earlier this week. So Jim, you bowed out of politics with somewhat short notice before the last general election, and can you tell us your reasons for doing that at the time? It came as quite a shock to some people, I think.
Yeah, it probably did. Look, I didn't intend for it to be at such short notice. I didn't anticipate an election. I don't think anybody did last September to come in February. Technically, this government should still be, or that government should still be. But unfortunately, it did happen very fast, and that was difficult for the party to hold the seat. And obviously, I regret that, and I wish that I hadn't any hand act or part to play in losing the seat for Fine Gael and West Cork. And my decision, I suppose, didn't help that. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Why did I leave politics? I mean, as time goes on, I can distill it a little bit better down for myself. I think there was a number of different reasons. One was, I mean, the whole political thing is so consuming. I spent 16 years in it. I am a consummate professional, I think. When I undertake something, I didn't have to do politics. I was full-time in it from day one. I gave up a teaching career and was a full-time county councillor when very few people were. And I was a young man with a young family and mortgage and all of those obligations. So I was deeply committed, and it can become very consuming. And I realised while I was progressing, I was happy to continue to do that. But there's a reason why after 20 years as a politician, you actually get a pension. No, you don't get it till you're 65 years of age. But 20 years is deemed as full service because it is such an all-consuming profession. So I did 16 years of full-time politics, and that takes its toll. It just does. One of the reasons. Secondly, there's a little bit of disillusionment. You come in full of idealism. You want to change the world. You start as a county councillor, become a backbench TD, become a minister. And you realise all the way along that, yeah, you can do a certain amount, but there's a lot of things you can't do. And some of that, there's some little frustrations locally and all of that will start to take their toll a little bit with you as well. So that was an influencing factor. Kind of had enough of politics scene at 16, after 16 years to know what I was about, to find it. And thirdly then, and most importantly, was certainly the family element. I mean, I've had the best 2 months of my 47 years of life this July and August. Had an absolute ball with the kids. We actually were separated during lockdown. My kids were over in Estonia. It just happened, my mum passed on at the height of the COVID, just as it was breaking out in this country. And as it happens, their great granny died over in Estonia. So they went to Estonia to that funeral and got caught in the lockdown. And we thought they were there for a week, maybe or 10 days or 2 weeks. And they ended up there for almost 4 months. Now they had a ball. They were working a farm outdoors all the time and all of the rest of it. And I was talking to them twice a day online. So, and I was still minister. I had functions to it, administer and all of that. But they came back in late June, early July, just as I was completely relieved from my duties. So we had a fantastic July and August. And, I think the hardest thing I found, Siobhan, was really what got to me and great to me was I could be away 4 days a week and 5 days a week. And when I came back, you were under such pressure again to be appearing locally, to go to events locally and to attend, funerals and so on, all the things that were expected of a TD locally. And the kids were like, Dad, when you be home? I'll be home later. And then they would not go anywhere with me. So if I did have a Sunday off, and I said, lads, you know what, we'd go down to the old time trashing downtown. No, Dad, no. They wouldn't go to the shop with me. Eventually, my own children would not go anywhere with me.
Because you'd get bombarded.
Not bad, but invariably people saw you and they saw an opportunity, and that was great for a while, and I loved it, and whatever. But eventually, after 16 years, and your kids are starting to pass you out in height and all the rest, and you're saying, you know what? So I think I did a very smart thing, and I was knowing when to bow out. I'd like to think at the top of my game. I think I had huge delivery, and I'm not going to bore you with any of those. This isn't a political broadcast, but I'd like to.
You were junior minister at the time, so that was pretty high ranking.
And in Department of Health, I mean, a junior minister in Department of Health has a bigger budget. I certainly had a mental health, and other people done. A lot of my senior colleagues in some of the other departments, like Arts, Heritage, and so on, even Justice. I forget which ones, senior ones anyway. But look, the whole level of health is just manic, and the whole media drive, and the whole demands, and the whole constant or whatever. So I had achieved a lot, and I think delivery locally, and as a politician, I had been rather successful. I had fought 4 elections successfully, topped poll twice, and so on. So I had a lot done, and I had a lot achieved, and I was very happy with my lot. And I realized that, and I'm so grateful that I got that insight to say, you know what, Jim, there is a bit more to life, and you don't have to keep continuing on this Ferris wheel or whatever, hamster wheel. And your kids are going to be gone very shortly. The eldest guy is 17. I teach him to drive now. I've time for do those things. So my late mum passed. I had time for her before she went away, and those kind of things. I was able to do things that I wouldn't have ordinarily able to do. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to serve in politics, but I'm also thrilled that I knew when to get off the stage and exit stage left.
Okay, and now you're a member of Fine Gael. So apart from being a publican and a teacher, which is probably very stereotypical Fine Gael politician, what attracted you to the party? Why did you choose that above all the others you could have gone?
To be honest, there was never any kind of, I was born into Fine Gael. My dad was a canvasser of the local branch, and, I loved Fine Gael. I was great friends with PJ Sheehan, the Lord of Mercy in him, and Jim O'Keefe, and used to canvass with him even as a young fella, small guys, we were running around with our fellas. So Fine Gael was in the genes. So there was never, I didn't have to sit up one day and say, I wonder what party will I join. But I will honestly say, hand on my heart, again, after 16 years in political life, public life, that I never once regretted that, or I never once said, I wonder if I made the wrong party, or God, I like that party, or whatever. No, I mean, it was a very natural fit for me anyway, all the way. But the decision-making was non-existent because I was born into it.
Right, okay. Now, I mentioned some of the careers. So tell me which one of between school teacher, principal, publican, politician, now you're moving into the private sector. Might be a bit early to give a rating for the private sector, but of all of those, which one did you enjoy? And don't be a politician and say, I enjoyed them all equally.
I'd have to say politics, I would have to say politics, no doubt about it. Look, I was a publican in my 20s. I had my own pub at 22. It was an absolute blast. Of course it was. I ran a really busy pub, used to be organising concerts, and the devil knows what below Rosscarbery, and as a young free guy, it was just a ball and a blast. And lots of money and all of that. And I was teaching then, and teaching was lovely for a few years, but for me, I am somebody who likes to keep doing new things and, whatever. So teaching was a little bit restrictive when I look back on it. Loved it as a young teacher, but I wasn't going to ever stay at something that was so, in my head, restrictive. I like to be doing new things and new challenges and new opportunities and all of that. And I'm a risk taker by nature. I'm an entrepreneur out and out. I know I am. And that's what I like doing is making change, making things happen. So teaching isn't as, I went on to be principal, and I thought maybe that might satisfy that whatever in me, drive in me, but ultimately it didn't. So the pub was great and teacher was great, but politics was second to none. I mean, even becoming a county councillor and having the ability to make change happen and to influence change and, impacting on people's lives. And, as I said, when I left, I may not have changed the world, but you changed somebody's world all the way along the way. And that was fantastic. Then I was mayor of the county. What an absolute honour. What a great, job to do. Becoming a TD was electric, and then becoming a Minister of State, it was so full of highs with all the challenges it presented time-wise and management, and it was so consuming. It still was just an amazing opportunity. But you become beholden to it, and that's why I'm very, very happy that I knew when to get off the stage. It wasn't that I was afraid I was going to lose my seat. I don't think I would have had for what it's worth. In the last election, nobody can ever say that for definite. I had no fear. But it was great to just leave on my own terms and have done as much as I'd done. And, positive. So politics had to be the favourite profession, no doubt about it.
Well, there's no doubt that you need a bit of a thick neck, I think, in politics. And I've mentioned this to you before because, I mean, I'm in this business 35 years myself, and I have seen it go from being quite, I suppose, not too difficult a job in the early days because all the criticism was face to face. You could see who was criticizing you and have it out with them. Nowadays, you're getting it right, left and center, and very often from anonymous trollers on social media sites who can say what they want because nobody can find them. And I mean, did that have any influence on your decision to get out? Because it's become really a really tough business for anyone in the public eye.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't really an influencing factor in deciding to exit the stage left, but I do agree with you, it is very tough. And like when I look at my predecessors, the late PJ Sheehan, the Lord of Mercy, and Jim O'Keefe, were TDs up to 2011, which is only 10 years ago. But like nobody in West Cork had their mobile phone number, their Twitter handle, or very few, there wasn't a dozen people had either those gentlemen's mobile phone number or had their Twitter handle or their Facebook, because they didn't exist, obviously. And all of these ways, while I was a TD, I have about 5,000 numbers on my phone, so I can imagine how many people have my number on their phone. And these people can text you, can ring you there and then. You have office numbers, you have all of that. You can be caught on Twitter, or got on Twitter. You can be got on Facebook. You can be got on WhatsApp. You can be got, there's so many ways of getting to you. And even on a Sunday evening, if you did take an hour out, and just close the curtains and decide to sit inside at home and watch the movie, there was a ping on your phone and next thing somebody was tweeting or something, and this kind of thing, and you were drawn back into it again. So I think the mobile phone radically altered the face of politics and what politicians have to do. And then you add that to the kind of the drag of having to travel 300 miles to work and, stay in hotels a couple of nights and all of that kind of thing. So all of that, certainly, but it wasn't a reason for me leaving. I mean, really and truly, the social media side of it was not a factor for me. Yeah, you have to have a neck, maybe having a pub and things like that earlier in my life, and, allowed me to kind of get used to fellas telling me to feck off and what they taught me and all of that. I don't know, I'm not sure what, but
maybe the teaching, does the teaching train you to be a bit more patient, maybe, and more gentle?
It could be a bit of all of that. I think there's a bit of all of that. And I think, if you're a risk taker, you're kind of more able for that. Look, I was one of 11 children as well, and all of that kind of thing. So I was well used to being hustled around. I wasn't raised in cotton wool at all. Have you 10 older brothers, or 10, not older, I was the middle, which I often think is interesting. I was the middle child. I had five older brothers and sisters and 5 younger brothers and sisters, and I was so nondescript. I mean, I know when I went into politics, some of the even local people were saying, which one of us him? I can't place Jim. I can place, I know Coleman, I know JC, I know whichever, and tried to place me. So maybe it was a bit of the middle child syndrome that drove me into creating,
wanting to be a bit different, to stand out.
Well, to be noticed and to try and say I could do that too or whatever, because I was so nondescript growing up. I wasn't into sport. I wasn't good at sport. I wasn't an achiever in academically. I wasn't doing anything really of any significance, and then kind of hit late teens, 20s, and decided, what, here goes, I'm going to try and buy a pub and get into that, and went on from there, and in school and in politics, and a bit of the I can do that element to it. What's her name?
Jack of all trades, Jim, is it?
Yeah, well, and a master of none, I don't know. I suppose it was just a belief in yourself to drive on and whatever. And so maybe that allowed me then to take the knocks as well, because I wasn't that sensitive to people's criticism online and things like that. I didn't really mind. Maybe I'd enough done at that stage of my life I wasn't going to be beholden to and I think politics was always a short-term project for me. Like, I was never a lifer. I would have said that to many people who knew me very, very well, would have known that my real, I remember having a kind of a psychological assessment done before I gave up teaching full-time to go into it. I went to this guy, a coach, really, a life coach, and said to him, you answered 600 questions and all this. And I said, will I be, suitable for politics? And he said, yeah. He said, and you'll be very good at it, but ultimately you'll never be fully satisfied in it because you're an out-and-out entrepreneur. Right. And I think that's why you'll see more of where I am. I know you covered last week my latest appointment to a board, and you'll see me go on to other boards and get involved with companies. I'm probably of an age now, I'm in my late 40s. I don't really want to be doing it myself all over again, take a huge, but I'd love to be part of entrepreneurial life, of business. So I think working with companies in that space, I have a good knowledge of the public side of things, from local authority to my time in the Dáil or whatever. It's not about influence and favour, it's just about knowing the world and knowing how things work and knowing how to get on and achieve. And ultimately I'm an entrepreneur, and I'd like to be part of that development for companies and that growth for companies. And I think that's where my please God, my next career will lie.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but just tell me first, what do you make of Irish politics since you left? Because it's probably been the most turbulent, I'd say, few months probably in your whole political lifetime. What's happened
Yeah,
in the last few weeks alone? What do you make of all the shenanigans between your
I
former
mean,
party and their new coalition partners?
yeah, and I mean, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coming together was probably the least story in all of it. Like that should have been a huge trauma and drama of its own, and that's probably the least story in all of this. It's not over by a long shot. There's still a good bit of bedding down, and people in the media and all of that are going to have an absolute field day with this government for another few months, till the end of this year at the very least. And when you think about it, it's natural. I mean, this government it didn't have a natural conception. Normally, governments are conceived out of an electoral win, and a party gets a thumping majority or even a victory at least in the polls, and there's a clear winner and there's momentum and they want to govern and all of that. Whereas this was born out of begrudgery and misery and misfortune, and I don't want to be there, and I don't want to be there, and I didn't have enough to be there. And so they were all, as I say, it wasn't a healthy conception that this government, for want of a better way of putting it. And I think that's what you're seeing play out now, and parties were kind of pushed in together, and it was like an arranged match, arranged marriage.
An unhappy arranged marriage.
Yeah, and the dowry was given over quickly, and you go off, and whether you like it or not, and you've got to make that work. So you're seeing a little bit of that play out in the early times of this government. I didn't anticipate as much of it, but I would have said, yeah, you're going to certainly have an element of that.
But
But
what about the behaviour of some of them, Jim? Now, you have the Clifton Golf Society carry on. Were you surprised by any of that?
Look, I mean, the minute I saw it, I said, oh my God. I mean, the second I saw it, I just said, oh, wow, this is a story that, my God, I haven't seen the likes of this in my lifetime. I'm not defending it for a second because it is completely indefensible. I mean, 100%. But like, there was 2 TDs there at the same time. There were, and people will forget that side of it. There was 2 TDs out of 160 TDs in Dáil were at that event. So it wasn't like they were all there to, which is kind of the narrative that can emerge potentially. And we just want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's the only thing I was saying it. But look, it was, I mean, how, like say, Derek Cleary is one of the nicest guys that you come across in politics, the former Minister for Agriculture from Mayo. Had been overlooked for the senior position first. I was gutted for him because he's just one of those decent, deserving guys. Thrilled to see him get his chance, and then like to see him do that. I kind of, and I'm not making excuse for Dara, but I was wondering, like, he has 3 or 4 advisors around him. And like, as a minister, you can run on top of your head a bit, and you can be kind of going from pillar to post, and this thing is being thrown in front of you, and you're reading briefs of, and it's you're inside in something and you're not thinking. But there are people paid around you to kind of keep the eyes open and watch what's happening. And I house somebody around Dara didn't say, Minister, I would have, no, maybe they did, maybe he ignored it. And if that case, I don't know enough about it, but like, that was an extraordinary event. But like, when you think of all the traumas that this government have endured, it's just, it's unbelievable. I mean, it really is. And as I say,
are you happy to be out of it, Jim?
I genuinely am. Now, I'm still very addicted to it, and I'm surprised with myself. I thought I might close off from it, but I'm glued to all the events and putting on Morning Ireland in the morning, not in an obsessive, healthy way or anything. But
maybe
I don't.
A smoke way now, Jim, is it? That's
like,
their problem now. It's not mine anymore.
I always had an interest in politics, and I clearly have still, and I clearly have, and I know now why I went into it, because I still love watching it. But my God, am I 1,000 times more comfortable and happier as a spectator. And there was a little bit of me being a little bit, and it sounds a bit, a little bit too honest or too straight talking for politics. Politics is also the art of, you need to do a bit more canoodling and kind of keep everybody sweet. And
spin is probably what the art of politics is all about.
Well, you have to kind of, sometimes you have to keep your opinions to yourself, Jim. I was often told that at the Fine Gael meeting, and harm, if you shut your mouth a bit, Jim, and that kind of thing. And they, I know where those guys were coming from. That sometimes you could try and bring everybody with you and say less. And I wasn't that type of politician. I mean, I often look back at, say, an interesting one was the Inskibreen there on your own doorstep, the plastics factory in the public meeting. I'm very, very friendly with Brendan McCarthy, who was the head guy in that. And, Brendan would have reached out to me on it, and I said, Brendan, I'm not going to go into one of your meetings. I have no say or sway in this. This is going to Bord Pleanála. Bord Pleanála is 100% independent in this country. Either we have a system where politicians decide what goes ahead, or an independent, qualified, professional group of people do. We've chosen as a society, and I support it, that an independent professional body does it.
But that could be seen by some people as you didn't want to touch it because it was too controversial, because for everybody who was against it, there was somebody who was for it because they could see jobs coming to the town.
Absolutely, and I take your point, and this is getting to the kernel of it, of the point I want to make, which is absolutely true and fair point to raise. But if you look at Jim Daly as a politician back in the day, I mean, I remember going to the Parkway Hotel, 600 parents and teachers up in arms over small schools. I wasn't a TD a wet week at this stage, and they were waiting for me, the former teacher, former INTO member, to stand up and bang the pulpit and say, I'm on your side. And I stood up and said to 600 people, I actually don't support what you're at here tonight. When I think of it, and Pascal, she had a camera there from RT, like I was incredibly brave in politics, and the ambulance issue in West Cork and the protection of life, or the abortion issue that, materialised. I was the only public representative that was on the side of 67% of the population in West Cork that was standing up for women's rights at the time, even though I come from a very, traditionally conservative area. So I don't think fear ever crippled me or caused me to make a decision like that to keep out of a meeting in Skibbereen about the plastics factory. What I was trying to get across there was, I can go in there and punch the air, and I can be false and pretend that I'll help you guys and I'm on your side. But the reality is I have zero input into that, and I'd rather be honest with you and straight up front and tell you that from day one. And I actually support a system where politicians do not have the say on who gets planning and who doesn't. And that was, so trying to get that across isn't easy. And of course, like what you said, it'll be seen as, oh, he was a coward, afraid to come in. Or I remember somebody said, Jim Daly should get off the fence and all that. I wasn't the fence person ever in politics. If anything, I should have stayed more on the fence and more issues and kept my head down. Now I didn't have any loss in politics, any electoral loss or anything. So I have no regrets, but it was tough, like the ambulance issue, which I believe passionately in, and I won't rehash it now. But, those kind of issues, the small schools issue. I mean, I felt very strongly at the time that you cannot support the retention of small schools with a ratio of 1:12. I think 2 teachers for 12 students, and they were moving at 2 teachers to 20, which was 1:10. When my child was in Clonakilty with 34 students in their class, So I would have thought about these things very, very deeply and understood them and taken a position that was, I believe, well-founded and well-sourced, but it wasn't always popular because people wouldn't see it, and, it takes a lot of work to bring people with you and all of that. So anyway, they're just examples of my time in politics that when I look back and now, I'd be very proud that I did stand and be counted and, take support Ilya Vradkar. Like I was always courageous, I was always not a bit afraid to go offside, and a lot of the Fine Gael faithful in West Cork were very, very disappointed with me to do that and not to support Simon Coveney. But I did what I genuinely believed was the right thing to do, as I always did. So, and that's not saying that I was great. I'm just saying that part of politics is interesting, and I always admire. I mean, I heard your podcast with Holly Kearns there recently. I was peeling the potatoes at home and listening to that podcast, and I thought she was fascinating, that she was so honest. I mightn't agree with everything she said or anything, but I just thought it was such a breath of fresh air to have a politician who seems to be thinking deeply about things, has a position on them, and a well thought out and articulate one. I thought that was so refreshing. I'm not here to promote the Social Democrats. They wouldn't be a party I'd be supporting their philosophy. I'm just being, general in the whole political issue, and I'd like to see politics evolve more into politicians that stand up and say what they genuinely believe and have well-founded, rather than trying to be all things to all people, which is the prevailing wind.
Interesting you should say that now, because do you think that there is a future for the big traditional party? I mean, there's 2 trains of thought here, and one is that we are seeing the demise of the traditional party, and that's what has us in this strange coalition of 3 at the moment. Like, do you think there's a future for Fine Gael as they are, or do they just need to totally transform and maybe move a little bit more left?
Yeah, no, I'll give you my honest thoughts. And again, I'm as likely to be wrong as the next person. I don't hold any authority in this other than my insights or my experience. But my genuine belief is, as of now, if you were to have an election in 2 years and all things be equal as the trajectory is going now, I think what you will see, and this isn't the political bias on my part, trust me on that, I think you will have an election, or you'll have straight down the middle election, just like England, just like America, between the left and the right. And you'll have Fine Gael winning out on the right, and you'll have Sinn Féin winning out on the left. I think Fianna Fáil are being squeezed very much in recent years. I think they've tried too hard to match Fine Gael being fiscally responsible and more to the right on one hand, and then they were trying to be Sinn Féin on the other day. And I think the water charges was a very seismic moment, or for Fianna Fáil, where they relented fully, did a complete U-turn and whatever. And I think in these really challenging times, I never ever underestimated people's sense of fairness, right and wrong when it comes to politics, and they have a nose that is just uncanny. They will read through the BS very, very quickly. And I think they're looking at Fianna Fáil here and now. All of this can change, right? But here and now, they're kind of saying, you know what, you're trying to be all things to all people, not interested, sorry. You know, I think the next election, if it was based on the dynamics of today, would be a straight down the middle contest between, do you want Leo Varadkar as Taoiseach or do you want Mary Lou McDonald as Taoiseach, left or right, a bit like, you know, England and America, and that kind of a polarised, more polarised division coming. Now that can change and Fianna Fáil could overtake Fine Gael in that space, whatever, but I think one of those centrist parties will dominate and will move more to the right and represent that space, and there will be a party on the left which will dominate.
Do you think, could we ever see the merger of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael?
You could, but it may not be on paper and out there in the open and all of that. It could just subsume one party, could just disappear, you know, whatever. If you look at the polling at the moment, where Fine Gael are in the high 30s, or mid-high 30s, Sinn Féin are thereabouts, and Fianna Fáil away down at 13 to 14%. And I'm not being party political, you know. I think I was always very broad-minded, and when it came to party politics, and got into lots of trouble for that I wasn't a black Fine Gael or a black, you know. So I'm not saying that in an anti-Fianna Fáil or generate anything. They may well rebound and come back and do great in government and all that, and I wish them all the very, very best. But in the here and now, in the current dynamic, you could actually see a party disappearing further or going on further unless they arrest that slide and start to you know, re-establish themselves. And again, it's about, I think, really in politics, that it's about defining yourself on hard decisions. People love it. I mean, I listened to Sammy Wilson this evening on Drive Time. I don't know whether you heard him or not, with Mary Wilson. And, you know, he had it yesterday about Trump. But by God, you know, he gave it as good as you couldn't defend what he was saying. But I really admired that he had a well, clearly thought out position, and he was able to give everything back as good as he got from Mary Wilson, who can be quite aggressive. I know you're a fan. I've seen you tweet about her. I didn't always see eye to eye with Mary, but, you know, so I think that's where politics is going. People have a fantastic nose. And they, you know, I remember principal saying to me inside the Manway that day at the school, where it was a packed emotional meeting, and our children, and, you know, all of this school and how it could all be brought out. And this principal came up to me and she said, through gritted teeth, after I stand up and saying, I'm sorry, I don't support you and I won't be supporting you. I had two other government colleagues there on the night who were TDs who said, oh, we'll talk to the minister, we'll talk to the minister. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't support you and I won't be talking to the minister on your behalf. And I could have been booed out of the hall. I wasn't, as it happened. I wasn't, you know, and they were just shocked because I'm a former teacher. But this principal said to me, she said, through gritted teeth, I never voted Fine Gael in my life, but I'd be tempted to tonight after hearing you, you know, even though she was a principal of a small school. And she just said, at least you have the courage to say where you stand and to stand over what you say, you know, and I think that's what people want.
Jim, do you know what's very ironic about all that is that you're not in politics anymore. So maybe the guy who stands up and tells it like it is, their future is sealed. They won't stick with it, or they can't stick with it, or maybe subtly they'd be elbowed out and made feel this isn't for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there is a future there for people. I mean, I'll put it, one of my own lads said to me that I'd like to go into politics, you know. I'd say do. I'd still think it's a very noble profession. If I had my time over again, I'd do it all again. I'd do another 16 years, you know, of the 16 years past, I wouldn't do 16 more years. You know, I thankfully didn't lose an election ever, and, you know, found that, you know, I managed to be a survivor through it all. And I think, you know, you command respect along the way. And I think people I think actually the politicians are behind the curve. I think the people are well ahead. You know, I really do. And I mean, just take that on the Protection of Life bill, you know. I think that was an example where so many politicians were just terrified of, you know, taking any stand and whatever, and stuck with the traditional. And like, as I say, I was the only public representative who was in tune with 67% and all that. And that's not boasting. I'm just saying, you know, be courageous. Stand up, inform yourself. Don't just be the lobby fodder to the lobby group and supporting every group. People really will appreciate it, and they will, you know, they will reward you afterwards. So I think my leaving politics isn't a reflection on politics. I'd be very, you know, other than the all-consuming nature of it. That's the part I think we would have to do. That's the part I would have a difficulty with. But politics per se, and my decision to leave it, does not reflect badly on politics.
Okay. And so moving now to your new role, which is in the home care sector. And I suppose a little bit of that is as a result of having been Junior Minister and Minister for Mental Health and Older People. So tell me, how did you come to that role, and why do you think that's the right place for you at the moment?
Yeah, what that role is, and thank you. I know your paper covered it last week, and I didn't realize you had so many readers, or I don't know, was it online or where people can
How could you be surprised, Jim?
Yeah, the amount of people that I met genuinely in the past week who said, well, on texts and everything that I got from people, well done on your new job. It actually isn't a job per se. I'm a board member, so I'm a director of the board. So, you know, I attend their meetings to advise them. They're the umbrella organisation that represent all of the home care companies, the private ones in Ireland. Home care is going to be huge in Ireland. I think you'll see in the next budget, and from there on, there will be a massive swing towards home care and away from the nursing home reliance on the traditional nursing home sector as we know it. And I think more and more of the money is going to be in huge. I think you will see a very seismic shift in the next budget towards home care. And that is the future. But home care itself has to come to the party as well. They have to pay the proper wage to their workers. They have to pay sick leave and all of that. And I have told the sector this in no uncertain terms as well in my capacity now, that they have to come to the party as well. And if they do that, I think the government will more than compensate, and we need to be able to put packages in place where people can come out of hospital straight to home, and instead of have 45 minutes in the morning and 25 in the evening, that they can have 6 hours a day instead of having to go in. So that can all be done. And I'm delighted to bring the insights I have from being a minister for older people and a passion for that area to the HCCI, who approached me and asked me would I come on their board. I'm on a number of other boards, company boards as well. Some will be choosing to announce it as time goes by, some will not. But that's the role I am, is I'm available to companies who want me to come on board in a kind of an advisory capacity, or whether it's a director. I'm studying in college, doing a course to become a company director, to qualified company director, and that's where my future is. So the HCCI is one aspect of that, but I'm thrilled to be involved in that care of the elder, and that's where I see my biggest passion at the moment, because that is huge evolution ahead of us. And I've seen it crystallise, and I think I've driven a lot of that crystallising during my time as minister, and I think I could even be more effective in the private industry, bringing that to reality and giving them the insights and the encouragement to drive that forward.
And is that something we're seeing in other countries, Jim, a move to home care now as opposed to the whole retirement village, which is kind of where we thought we were going maybe 10 years ago?
Well, we're going to both. I mean, home care will complement the move to the retirement. The retirement village will always be there, and home care will be a part of that. So there's a statutory home care scheme which will put home care on a statutory footing. So in other words, if you or I need home help when our day comes, Siobhan, we won't be waiting on a wing and a prayer or ringing the local TD and hoping he can get it for us. You'll get it by statute. You'll be entitled to it by law. Other countries, I follow very closely New York. Michael Dowling is the head of the largest healthcare company over there, an Irishman who I've got to know very well. And I've watched the Australian model, the New Zealand model, all of that. So really what you're going to see is, in Ireland, traditionally, you just have the home and the nursing home, and it was one or the other. And you have a lot of people in nursing home who should never have gone in there. Now, as soon as they went in there for a few months, they needed nursing home care. They deconditioned very quickly. But there were people who were living in rural areas, out in a two-bed house or two-story house, big rattling old house, and they just started to go down very quickly, and they couldn't be left there on their own, so they were into nursing home, and they were lying in bed for 21 of the 24 hours a day, and they deconditioned too fast. So what I've been doing for the 3 years as minister, and what is going to become the reality, is build up a whole continuum from their own home. You may not get to stay in your own home, but get in to stay in a step-down home, a supported environment where there's home help 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, and all that kind of thing, depending on the level of your need. You'll always have a need for nursing home. You will always have a need, but not to the extent that we have relied on it in Ireland today. People will be spending much, much shorter time in nursing home. You will be much more acutely ill before you need nurse-led clinical care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Ideally, you should only be in a nursing home for 2 to 3 months at most before you die. You shouldn't have to be there for years and all of that, if you can be in a kind of a midway supported living environment. And that is going to happen, but we have to put the investment, which I think you'll see in this budget, into the home care sector. We have to have it guaranteed by statute and regulated, which I have driven an awful lot of that development in my time as a minister, and that's all about to come to pass. So that is very, very exciting development for our society and for genuine, revolution of care of the elderly. And I intend to be part of that now on the outside world as well.
But is that just diverting money from one sector to another? Because I would be quite cynical now at the amount of investment we can afford to put into any new plans, given the amount of money we have spent on the pandemic, and that was going to have to be paid at some stage. And then we had a report last week, I think, from Jim Power saying that our pensions is basically a juggernaut coming at us, that we're not going to be able in 10 or 15 years or 20 years when I'll be looking for my pension, there'll be nothing left in the kitty. So how are we going to fund the likes of a whole new move from one sector of the health service to another? Where's that money going to come from?
Well, in the very first instance anyway, I mean, what I would envisage ultimately happening is we spend €1 billion on nursing homes at the moment, roughly, and €500 million on home care. I'd like to see that reversed over 3 to 4 years. You see more of a reluctance to go into nursing homes already because of COVID. COVID has expedited the journey we were on. It hasn't altered it, and this isn't reactive. And I'm not, but that was my principled philosophy very much as a minister, and was driving that way anyway. And COVID happened to be a blessing in disguise to kind of expedite it and bring it to a head and get people to move that way. So people are more reluctant to go into nursing homes at the moment, and they are, there's a fear around it and all of that. So people are more anxious to stay at home and much more anxious. So if you divert $500 million, you can't do that in one go. So you're going to have to bring it in as new funding in the first year and 2 years, but you will see a lessening demand on nursing homes as the more people get to live in their own home for longer. So it's not necessarily a massive increase in spending.
Okay,
now people tell you it's a lot of people stay in their own home than a nursing home. That's a moot point. If you need 100 hours of home care a week, it's not cheaper to stay in your own home than a nursing home. We have to be a bit real about that. But this isn't new investment. It's really just reorientating a more sustainable approach that can actually cost, similar to that, to get the same level. It has to be an outcomes focus, and we have to look at outcomes, not what we're putting into it. That's what we traditionally always look at, but look at what we're getting for the money we're spending.
Would there probably be a saving from a health point of view, because I'd imagine people would be happier in their own homes and they may get a better health outcome then as a result, so we may be able to cut down on the cost.
Well, you see, people are going to be coming out of hospital now so fast, Siobhan. Wait till you see this winter. People, if any of us have to go into hospital, you will be out so fast it won't be. There is no hanging around hospital. Hospital is such an unsafe place to be if you don't need to be there. So, and particularly if you're anyway elderly and vulnerable and underlying conditions. So that's where the real emphasis is going to home care. We need to get people out very quickly. You can't be saying, they're very stiff and they can only barely walk, whatever. You need to get them home and get them help to do it at home and to recuperate and all of that at home before they were going to nursing homes. The transitional care unit in Clonakilty being a very good example of that, but you'll have now more of an emphasis actually getting them home and putting in the supports around them at home. That's where it is going to go. And COVID has really expedited, as I say, all of that.
And tell me, you worked in the hospital in Clonakilty for a while there at the height of the pandemic, really, Jim, wasn't it? In the kitchens. How did you find that? Or like what possessed you to want to do that in your spare time?
It was a really interesting time. I suppose it was a really challenging time. I was in Minister for the Older People. I couldn't really go up to Dublin at the height of it and be involved in the department. So all of my meetings were online and things like that. So I got a call. I'm the chair of the Friends, the CORDA, we call ourselves, of Clonakilty Community Hospital. I'm the chairman of that. So the matron rang me and said, or the director nurse up there rang me and said, would I find anybody in the community who would be willing to come up at weekends to take the food from the kitchen around to all the different wards to deliver it, because they couldn't have cross-contamination, staff from the wards going to the kitchen and vice versa. So they needed somebody to take to us. And I said, consider it done, I'll do it. And she said, oh my God, we're not having you, were a minister or whatever, we're not having you could be up here putting the trolley around the place. I said, seriously, I don't want, I said, it'll be done. I said, I would love it. I knew, I was doing these online things 5 days a week with, Minister Harris and all this in HI and Tyke Daly, and whom I saw your podcast as well recently with. I was doing all of these things, and this was going to give me a first-hand insight into what actually it's like in a nursing home with an outbreak of COVID. There was an outbreak of COVID there at the time, quite a serious one. So I was up there, booted and suited and gowned and masked and all the rest. And I knew very quickly, people did say to me, God, you were great to go up there and people around the corner say, God, a lot of people are running from COVID and you're going right into it. But I knew instinctively, thankfully, I proved right, that I was safer up there than I was going to Dunstores or going to any shop. I don't mean to mention any particular.
Poor Duns.
Yes, going to any grocery store. We'll throw an Aldi a little just to make sure they all get it collected. But I was safer, I knew, in the hospital because I was aware there was COVID there. So I was so, you took the necessary precaution. And I spent, 7-8 weeks there just during the weekends. Some of them were long weekends, as in bank holiday Mondays as well. And for those 7 or 8 weeks, and COVID was all over the place, not all over, but there was significant outbreaks of COVID.
Well, Clonakilty Hospital wasn't probably the worst hit, I think, in West Cork, certainly.
It was, at that time. And look, they managed it superbly, really, to be fair. It was a whole new experience for everybody. They had to get on top of it very quick, bring in infection control, all of that. The staff just were phenomenal. They genuinely were, and I know everybody says that, but they were just phenomenal. And for me to witness all of that firsthand and then be contributing to very high-level discussions at the Department of Health and HSE level on a weekly, daily, ongoing basis at that stage, I had first-hand knowledge. I wasn't intimidated by any of the terminology. I wasn't trying to figure and imagine when they were talking about, where do you locate, co-locate, or any of these terms that were, I can't remember them now, that were strange to me at the time. All of a sudden, they became very free-flowing to me and I had the confidence to say, actually, I'm on the ground beside one of these nursing homes. I can tell you here and now, this is what needs to, whatever.
Yourself and Leo, I think, wasn't it?
Leo, well, yeah, I was trying to compete with Leo for the attention.
But no,
Yeah, the photo op and all of that. No, it just gave me a genuine, and I loved it. And look, I'm very fond of that facility, and I became very attached to it during my time as minister. As I say, I'm still chair of the Friends of it.
But the patients there must have got great distraction too from their fears by having a junior minister rattling around, bringing them their dinner.
Yeah, either that or I frightened the life out of this, and it's very bad if he's around. I used to be allowed there. I suppose that was a part when we had Sunday sessions, which obviously we had to stop.
They probably thought they were delirious, Jim, did they?
Yeah, they saw the minister. But we used to do Sunday sessions every Sunday, and I loved them. I mean, musicians volunteered a couple hours on a Sunday evening, and all the patients were brought in. And, myself and some of the other friends of our friends, our Corda group, would be there with us. Any two of us would be there every Sunday. So I kind of got to know them, all the patients there. So it wasn't really this daunting task of going into a hospital that I didn't know. I got to know the staff. I got to know during my time as that. So I loved it. I mean, we set up the Corda about a year and a half. We set an ambition to raise 100 grand. We've that's well surpassed at this stage. We've had lots of successes there, and I've loved every bit of that. So I'm going to continue my attachment and my involvement with that hospital through that role. So this was just a further aspect of that, to be honest, more than trying to, there wasn't a political gain or anything. I didn't need any publicity or thanks or anything from anybody for it. I was gone from politics and all of that at that time.
That's great. So tell me now, did you get any time to, like the rest of the world, with the exception of journalists, time to watch Netflix and read and take up a new skill other than kitchen duties?
Yeah, I did. I think kitchen duties really was a big part of it. I mean, I learned to make brown bread. Very proud of myself.
Well, you weren't in on the sourdough obsession, were you?
No, not quite that, but just to make basic brown bread and curry. Curry is my big weakness in life, and making curry from scratch and all of that. So yeah, definitely spent a good bit of time in the kitchen. Audible was my kind of guilty pleasure, was right. Audible, just listening to the books through the earpiece and going for long walks during the lockdown there or whatever, just out walking. I used to get up really early in the morning, kind of 5:30, 6 a.m. Made a point of doing that every morning and getting out for an 8 or 10k walk. The weather was amazing. And I had the thing in my ears and listening to whatever storybook I was going through and all that. So that'd be my memories of lockdown. And then you got back around 8 o'clock in the morning. And, that was crazy. I remember one night talking to an official at 10 to 1 in the morning and getting up the following morning at 6:15, talking to an official again in the Department of Health. So there was some really strange times in the middle of it. And then things calmed again. And, so I was able to, I got more than my share of downtime, to be fair, during lockdown, and absolutely loved it. And I think that gave me the whole sense of, I had a very good lead out of politics. I was still, attached to it in some way while I was still minister, but I wasn't frontline.
It was a bit of a gentle exit for you, wasn't it? Because
it was,
I think at one point we thought you were gone, and then you popped up opening the new mental health facility.
I was always fascinated with that. How the media kind of, assumed because you weren't, and I took up lots of your national colleagues on this, just because I wasn't gracing the airwaves with my wonderful presence or whatever. I joke. And
then we accused you of being gagged by the minister,
yes,
I think.
And all that, actually, yeah. So it was, I mean, not fun because these were very tough times, but that's all part of the ebb and flow of politics. And, that's what I think politics did for me when I did first. I had this thing about the media are awful and this is awful and that is awful. All of that, as you get to real experience, what you said, you know what, now there's two sides to everything. And yes, there's a bit of this and yes, a bit of, but you become much more measured and much less dim and us in everything, So, look, what I've learned in politics, I could have spent 30 years in university and I don't think I'd have learned it it was incredible. And that's really what I'd say if you were to ask me sum up politics in one word, was learning. Oh my God, did I learn? And I love that.
Great. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us, Jim. I think we've even gone a bit over time today, but it was well worth the chat. And listen, best of luck with the new role. And I'm sure we'll be hearing lots more from you.
No bother, and thanks for asking me. I thought everybody had forgotten about me, so I was delighted when I got the call. So.
Once in politics, never forgotten.
Enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks, Siobhan.
And so to this week's newspaper. On page 1, we're taking a look at the plight of local fishermen. Patrick Murphy of the Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation tells us that the combined challenges of COVID, a no-deal Brexit looming, and now controversial penalty points legislation have all come together to create a perfect storm for the local fishing industry and indeed the national fishing industry too. And he describes it as game over if Brexit becomes the final nail in their coffin. We have an extensive interview with him inside on foot of a podcast he did with us a few weeks ago. And we also have an interesting story on page 1 about a young doctor from Bantry. 23-year-old Owen O'Flynn contracted COVID-19 a few months ago, but he had actually not realised it at the time. He'd had some mild symptoms, but it wasn't until a few months later, in May of this year, when it really hit him hard. And it left him struggling with problems with his lungs, his heart and his kidneys, and landed him in ICU in CUH where he had been working. So we've a very in-depth interview with Owen about that, and he issues a warning to young people to realise that they are not immune from this. He was a very fit and healthy young man who had climbed Kilimanjaro, and he really wants to stress the point that no matter how fit and healthy you are, it can strike you, and it can strike you hard. So we have a full story with him, interview with him inside on that. We also have a report on the tragic death of the young man from Macroom who died last weekend at a house in Wilton, and some more details on that case. And on page 2 we have a quite disturbing court case from Clonakilty involving a Garda who feared he was going to lose his finger after a row with a man when he was accompanied by 2 other Gardaí at the scene. And we also have a nice story from Bantry Fire Station because they've got a brand new fire engine which does an awful lot more than the previous one, and of course it's very important because Bantry is located probably the closest station to the Whitty oil terminal, so we've seen before how important a good fire service in Bantry is for that in particular. On page 3 we have quite a disturbing story about a convicted sex offender who was working in a charity shop in Skibbereen, and the fact that when members of the public identified him, they also made the point that this was in very close proximity to 2 play schools. We also have a report on illegal dumping in the area, which is becoming quite critical now, according to one councillor, and also the shortage of school buses this week, given that the schools are back now and there's still quite a few vacancies for bus drivers. Bus Éireann has put out the call this week for more drivers and even some taxis to come to the rescue, because with social distancing they need more vehicles on the routes. We also have a nice story on page 5 about a new TV series that has a lot of West Cork links and a lot of very well-known names, and it's starting this Sunday night on RTE. And also we have an update on recent dog thefts in the area. And in news features this week we look at the aftermath of the flooding, and we do a town-by-town detailed report on what happened and what the plans are to fix that. We also have a feature on a new book on Irish newspapers and their role in Ireland's troubled history, and the article in particular focuses in on the role of the Southern Star, which was quite significant, especially around the Civil War and the War of Independence. And a lot of our readers won't realise that Michael Collins was also a shareholder at one point, and the paper would have printed his election manifesto. In property we have a lovely house in Dunworley which has its own beach and stunning sea views, and in business we have details of awards for quite a few local businesswomen this week. In motoring we review the new Volvo XC60, and in farming we report on the cancellation of the National Ploughing Championships and the effect COVID has had on land values. In our community section we have all the usual regular columns, but we also look at the first full year of the new air ambulance service, and Emma Connolly continues her COVID diary. And if all that wasn't enough, this week we also have an excellent home and garden magazine which is packed with information and advice on interiors, houseplants, future homes, budget DIY, feng shui and lots more. So don't forget, if you can't get to the shops, you can subscribe online by going to thesouthernstarTV and clicking on the e-paper tab, or call the office on 028 212 00 for a postal copy to be sent out to you. And now for this week's music. Occasionally in our podcast series, our various presenters take a look back at our popular Southern Star session series of videos, all recorded in our studios in Skibbereen. And this week it's the choice of our digital manager and podcast editor, Jack McCarron. Jack has chosen John Blek's song, The Blackwater. The Blackwater was taken from John's 4th album, Thistle Thorn, which was recorded between Clonakilty and Louisville, Kentucky during the early part of 2018. John's latest album, The Embers, was released in February and is available to purchase from his website johnblek.com, and that's John B-L-E-K. So here's the Blackwater.
Water rose and I couldn't get down. Found myself stuck on high ground. Drowned the streets upon which we grew. Broke the banks of the Blackwater. Broke the banks of the Blackwater. Roaring down the road to Rue. Everything you thought you knew, the good, the bad, the false and true. Bury the steed, we'll need the Blackwater. Bury the steed, we'll need the Blackwater. I'll hold my head above the water, my love, until the day the dove returns with proof of you. It's rising high on the sycamore. Line the streets where we lived before. Gather your families and climb aboard. Covered in the Blackwater, be buried in the Blackwater. I'll hold my head above the water, my love, until the day the dove returns with proof of. I'll hold my head above the water, my love, until the day the dove returned with proof of you.
Thank you for listening to the Southern Star Coronavirus podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our podcast, which is available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.